Welcome to another episode of the Thunderstock Show. It's a collection of valuable brainstorms to enhance your life, liberty, and pursuit of property. This season is all about the EOS journey. I have none other than Steve Morris. Steve is an EOS implementer. He originally hails from New Zealand, not to be confused with Australia. Don't make that mistake. And now is in Colorado. Steve, pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for coming on. What's new and exciting?
Well, thanks for having me on the show, Ross. I'm really stoked to be here today. So what's new and exciting with me is, in addition to my EOS practice, I also live on a farm in Colorado, and it's 31 acres. And the interesting thing I'm learning about being here in Colorado, I've been here for 3.5 years now, is we don't get very much rain. We get 13 inches of rain a year. And just growing things is a challenge. But it's been raining the last couple of weeks, so everything's green. And, this is a huge contrast to, some of the parts of New Zealand where I'm originally from that I really love. New Zealand's green, right? If you've seen Lord of the Rings, it's green. There's parts of New Zealand that get 27 feet of rain a year. And here we are in Colorado, lucky to get 1 foot. It's quite a contrast.
Oh my goodness. Well, part-time farm. What do you grow, hope to grow, find challenging to grow? What does that look like? It's a very unique, I would say, side hustle, but it's probably a lifestyle.
Yes, well, it's all part of when people get to know me in terms of the things that I'm really interested in, and it all links together with my EOS practice and my past. But being here on the farm now is really about the future. It's about healthy living. It's about getting grounded, with who I am, but also extending that to a wider community. So we put in a permaculture food forest. So permaculture is a way of planting out agriculture in terms of trying to mimic nature. So instead of sort of monocropping where we'll have an entire field full of apple trees or something, or Ross, in the part of the world you come from, the mushroom farming.
Well, that's next door. I can talk to you. Well, I can't wait to dive into this, but go on.
So permaculture is we get away from monocropping and we get into creating what are called guilds of plants. So sort of when you go into a natural forest, you have, tall trees that are surrounded by different plants at different canopy heights. And all of these plants work together to collaborate, to help each other. And so when we plant out a permaculture orchard, as we're doing, we have fruit trees, then we put berry bushes, we put trees in there that have some berries that are for the birds, because there's always a principle of sharing with nature. And then, if we create trees for the birds, then they won't eat the fruit that we would like to have and things like that. So we're trying to sort of mimic nature, get things into balance, and then really create a place beyond this where I'm creating a place where my clients are going to be able to come and just kind of get away from the whirlwind of their business and slow it down and get reconnected with themselves and with each other and really what's going on, in their lives, in their business. It's a beautiful place we have here. There's a 14,000-foot mountain keeping her loving, caring watch over us. There's a lake on the other side of the property with cornfields all around. So it's just a place to get away from the text messages, the emails, the phone calls, and take a breath. Actually, maybe take 2 or 3 breaths and just start to, as I say, slow it down. And, along the way, while we're doing that work, if I can feed my clients a lovely fresh farm-to-table lunch, that's sort of those nutrients start feeding their mitochondria, right? And really starting to address, the more holistic human being. And that's really what I'm all about.
Talk about a place for a clarity break. How about it? The picture you painted with your words reminds me of something that I might have studied reading of Ralph Waldo Emerson or Henry David Thoreau. Those authors, the British Romantic period of staying in tune with nature, not trying to dominate it. I know in agriculture now there's aggressive pesticides and aggressive tilling, that topsoil is in danger. One of the things that's interesting about Lancaster County, and I read this historical article. I'm glad there was a reason I read this article this morning. It was that Pennsylvania has the most roads in the northeast of the country, of all the states, because in the beginning of the country, there, like Lancaster County was considered the breadbasket of the 13 colonies. So we had the most roads because it wasn't just going connecting towns to towns and cities to cities. It was from farmers to markets, so that farmers would go from Lancaster out in the farms all the way to Philadelphia, 40, 50 miles. And they had to get roads from their, specifically from their farms. And it sort of developed that way. But I actually interviewed someone, I would say 3 years ago, by the name of Steve Groff, who is a cover crop coaching, like he's a cover crop coach who goes into how to preserve topsoil and how to do what you're talking about with regenerative agriculture. So super interested in that. Lancaster only gets 44 inches of rain, not nearly as much as New Zealand, but we're one of the rainiest places in the country. It probably helps with our agricultural roots. So glad to connect on that. Also glad to hear that you do sessions on site. I was going to ask you that, and you shared it during your explanation. Talk about a unique place to get to harness human energy, which is one of the main purposes of EOS.
Right.
By connecting with nature. What better?
Yeah, no, it's just really about, as I say, like I come in and start working with a group, and oftentimes, I've got a collection of pretty stressed out individuals in front of me who have got a lot going on, head down, running like heck in their business. And we really do need to take some time and take a step back to get clarity, right, about what is going on. We had some conversations last week in our QC, our quarterly collaborative exchange here in Denver. And, one of the perspectives is, an overscheduled entrepreneur has no space for transformation. And that's what we're talking about here. When we go on an EOS journey with my clients, we're talking about a journey of transformation, getting away from where they used to be with their business and getting to elevating and getting to a place of more peace, more flow, more calm, more centeredness about where they're taking the business. And we've got to create some space for that to happen. And, we can't do that in the office with the phone ringing and people knocking on the door. Hey, boss, the machine just broke. What am I going to do? All that stuff.
Amen. I look back at time I spent in office, spending 10 to 12 hours a day at the office. When I took a step back in a career change, I did some reflecting. I thought, at least half the time I was just spent being reactive, responding to other people who needed me because I was there and available. And time spent taking time to change the location of the workplace enabled much more proactive scheduling. And as you said, the word transformative, you get to win back your calendar and win back your sanity in a lot of ways.
Yes. Time's a critical thing, right? And I think one of the interesting things for me in my journey, and then also in the work that I do with my clients, is, everybody says, well, I've got a time problem. I don't have enough time. But what if we flip this around and say, well, it's not really about time, it's about energy, and looking at the things that give you energy, right? And so one of the tools that we work on in EOS is what we call the delegate and elevate tool. So really looking at the things that, the entrepreneurs, my clients, what truly inspires them, what are they really great at? What do they love doing, right? And it's Dan Sullivan uses the term unique ability, right? And so when we can get somebody in that zone most of the time, where they're doing the things they love doing, they're in that flow state, they're the ninja, they've got it all, they get energy, right? And I think when you're in that place of getting energy, doing the things you really love doing, then time is not so much of an issue anymore. But conversely, when you're sort of stuck doing the stuff you don't like doing, the stuff you're not good at, the stuff that you procrastinate about endlessly, that stuff sucks away at your energy, slows you down, right? And then you've got a time problem. Then I don't have enough time because, oh my gosh, I've got to get into QuickBooks and I'm behind on my billing and all of this stuff, or I've got 17,000 emails that I need to reply to. I don't want to do any of it, right? It's just sort of so. If we reframe the time issue into an energy one, and then find the things that feed your energy. And I think it's a huge way of being able to kind of unlock, the things that are that are keeping people stuck in their businesses.
There is an absolute instance of relativity. Not to get into theoretical physics too deeply, but Einstein's theory of relativity. Typically, the faster you're moving, the slower time feels like it's passing, and the slower you're moving, the faster time feels like it's passing. Perfect example. If I have to spend 1 hour in QuickBooks, it feels like 8 hours. If I spend 8 hours doing strategic planning for a client, it could feel like 1 hour. And then my wife says, "What are you doing up? Go to bed."
Yes. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
completely, I believe in the relativity of energy.
Yes. Yeah. And then, so we're looking at, the energy of one person, right? But in EOS, of course, we're working with a leadership team. And so looking at the collective energy of that leadership team, and this book up here that People Dare to Build an Intentional Culture, really does look at the, like focusing in on the things that, bring energy to each individual in the leadership team, but then how are they coming together and bringing their energy to the leadership team table, because I see that fundamentally in how are people showing up. um, how do they see the world? Do they see their world outside of the business as being a world full of abundance? Is there enough out there, and let's get after it, let's go get it, right? Or do they come to the leadership team table seeing the world as a world of scarcity, then that there's not enough out there, and we're in competition, and it's a fight, and it's a grind, and all of this? So how those leadership team individuals see the world is fundamentally important, and it's related to the energy that they're bringing. The second thing that I also look at is how are they seeing each other, right? Because a huge part of EOS is working together as a healthy, functional, cohesive leadership team. And so seeing each other, do they look around the table and fundamentally in their heart feel that everybody else around the table is doing their best, right? Or are they looking around the table maybe with judgment in their mind about the other people on the team? And those things influence their energy. Talking with somebody yesterday about just how we truly form a high performing team that's got each other's backs, where everybody's supporting each other, or are people holding back? Are they just resisting, or just kind of letting things go?
Are they putting up scarecrows versus berry bushes, dealing
Yeah,
with the birds, right?
exactly.
I mean, I hope that analogy lands, but it really is an interesting parallel between what that you do in the 31-acre sacred grove and what you do for managing human energy. There's a parallel to it. You
Absolutely.
have to identify like what components in the landscape are meshing well and symbiotic and helping one another to grow and flourish to the best of their natural capacity. And really, I've it's funny that to share this, I spent substantial time early in my career marketing in sub irrigation container gardening,
Oh,
very very
okay.
niche type of gardening. So I spent tons of conversations with people in the Golden Triangle back when the legalization of cannabis was a thing. Tons of
Mm,
conversations with urban farmers. Tons of conversations with your everyday gardener. And one of the things that I learned from gardeners and gardening, all things agriculture, is that whenever something occurs to the garden or the individual plant, it's usually a blocking of something, right? It's either a lack of light, it's either too much water, blossom end rot. There, it's an imbalance, and it sounds like
right.
what you do as an EOS implementer is you identify the imbalances on teams, and you just try to facilitate, like remove the dam, so to speak, from the water flow.
Yes. 100%. Yes. Getting rid of those blockages, the obstacles, the things that are getting in the way, and getting into a state of balance and flow. I think balance is an interesting word, and it's an interesting concept, because people talk about work-life balance all the time, right? Well, if
Sure.
we're talking about time and energy and things, well, the subject of work-life balance comes into there. And typically, when I start, when I'm talking with prospects or I start working with clients before they've got the system of EOS in their business, they may not have the best work-life balance going on. And but balance to me, like some people sort of think, well, balance is a static thing. But to me, balance is a dynamic thing. And so in addition to my, farming that I'm currently involved in, I started my career designing sailboats and multi-million dollar racing yachts. And the whole thing about a racing yacht is it's in a dynamic balance, right? When you've got all of the wind forces equaling and balancing out the hydrodynamic forces, the healing moment, the righting moment, the driving force, the resistance. But all of these things move around a center. And so what I mean by this is sometimes, like we're striving for balance, but some weeks, stuff's happening and we need to be in the business working like heck, right? But
Hmm.
then the balance comes, well, then we come to the farm and we slow it down and we get to take a breath and figure out how we're doing, right? And then we can go back into the business, or we go take a vacation, or we have a busy day out on the road, but then we can have a day where maybe we can, do some breath work and some yoga and some meditation and just kind of tap back into the energy of the body. Because a lot of people I talk to is sort of like, I don't have great work-life balance, right? I'm working too hard, but just sort of seeing, like, taking that frame that, okay, yes, we will aim for a balance around a center, but it's dynamic and it's going to move and you need to flex depending on what's going on. But if you have a hard day, then the balancing is, well, we need to back it off for a day. We need to, go into a deload situation, right? And then we can go back in. So I think, yeah,
I,
a lot of analogies.
well, I'm going to slam one more nature analogy because you made me absolutely think of it with the boat and how if a boat were not to move on the water, you'd probably think that's a UFO. You'd probably think that's some alien foreign object. What's going on? How is it not rocking back and forth with the tides? Things like that. But a tree, it's interesting. When I think of balances, I think of like beautiful trees. And one of the things about trees that's interesting is if you have trees in places that have no wind, they typically don't necessarily get to be too tall
Mm,
because without, like, one of the precursors to growth is having to sway back and forth with the wind and bend, not break. Right. And I think of rigid, like being rigid as, oh, well, that thing might be perfectly symmetrical and straight up and down, but it may not have been tested by wind. So a sharp gust could knock it all over. I don't think that's balance either. So I think of sometimes people think of work-life balance as, oh, I'm working all the time. I have no time for life. But really it's like, how do you maintain the cycles and, that
mm,
circadian rhythm of your work-life balance so that you don't become rigid and say, oh no, my schedule, I'm off by 30 minutes, woe is me, and have a breakdown, right? It's like,
yes.
how do you step back and reset the central nervous system to have both the sympathetic and parasympathetic so that you're on when you need to be on, you're off when you need to recover.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great segue to, I talked about how people see the world. I talked about how they see each other around the leadership team table. The third component is how do they see themselves, right? And so what's the what we call the useful or the non-useful thinking that's going on in our heads there, right? And everybody has that judging voice, right? And leadership team members who, I hear a lot of the imposter syndrome, right? I hear a lot of people saying, hey, I'm waking up, I'm making all these decisions in my business. And then I wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning worrying about, did I make the right decision yesterday? But my point in all of this is, this balance and this flow is when we start to sort of see these thoughts and to be able to reframe them in a way that gives you energy. So, for example, if one of the ways that you might be seeing the world is, hey, all of this stuff is happening to me,
Mm.
right? The machine broke, my tax bill is due, the accountant's late, I've got 90 days, days sales outstanding. These are all things that are happening to me. Why don't people fix this, right? If we reframe this, and one of the things that I do in working with my clients is to sort of shift this mental framework to the idea of, as a possibility, these things are happening for you. And so when you can kind of stop judging yourself as, maybe I didn't make the right decision, or there was some interaction that didn't go right. Well, if this was something that's happening for you, and it's an opportunity for you to learn, that's how we get better. One of the huge things about, and the interesting things about, the human mind is that we really only learn through failure, actually, right? The key is not to give up, right? The key is to keep going, right? To learn from the failure, and then to keep putting another foot in front of the other and keep moving forward. Don't just give up and fall into a
Show me someone who's never failed. I'll show you someone who's never accomplished anything.
Right. Yes. Playing it safe, playing it small is one real great way of never having to find out where your edges are, where the boundaries are, and pushing those things forward. So I think there's a huge part of, that balance, right? As you're sort of talking about the wind, pushes the tree, it makes the tree stronger, right? And so the mental reframing for my clients is, these things are happening for me. These things help me get stronger, right? And one of the things that, I've got a whole morning practice about how I'm going to get ready for my day, and, bringing in the farm and the environment that I'm in. One of the things that I say to myself every morning is that I am grateful for the rain that is the environment of my business. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, a lot of people don't like rain.
I don't get that, but you're right.
A lot of people come from this inner stance of, oh, it's raining, I don't like the rain,
But those same people like food, and you can't really get food without rain.
Exactly, right? And so, and then the connection to here, as we were talking about earlier, we only get 13 inches of rain here in Colorado. So I love the rain. I embrace the rain. The rain is happening for us here. And so I take that same analogy into my business and growing my business. I'm like anybody else these days, reaching out, finding prospects, finding people who are interested in going on the EOS journey with me. And, it's different than it used to be 30 years ago. These days, there's more of a culture of getting ghosted, right? People don't return phone calls, don't return emails, that sort of thing. And I used to get really wrapped around the axle about that stuff. That really kind of used to get under my skin. And then, this mental reframing for me is, this is happening for me. This is the environment of my business, and it's just the way it is. And, I could see this as, quote unquote rain, or something that I'm resisting or I don't like, or I could see this as something that's happening. This is beneficial, right? This is making me stronger. This is helping me learn different ways of reaching out to people, and it becomes a game for me now, right? It's sort of like this idea of, well, it takes me 29 no's to get to a yes. Let's have at it. Let's get through those 29 no's, because somewhere in there I'm going to get my, the yes, right? And so just these sort of like these mental ways of seeing the world, seeing other people, and seeing myself. And I can look at non-useful ways of thinking, and I get to choose. I think that the huge paradigm is you get to choose your thoughts. Simple but not easy. You get to choose your thoughts.
That's one thing that you can control, is your thoughts. Many things you cannot, whether it rains or does not rain, whether it's hot or it is not hot. You cannot control that.
Right. And, as we're, in this environment today, and working with my clients in business, there's a lot of stuff going on. Tariffs, no tariffs, economy, interest rates, employment, all of this stuff, right? And if you get beset by all of that and kind of buy into the TikTok, headlines and go down that rabbit hole.
Right.
I see this, right? And then people their amygdala gets engaged, and they're just in fight, flight, or fear, and they can't make any useful decisions in their business. They're stuck.
There,
And
by consuming so much, not only are you in charge of what you think, but you're in charge of what you pay attention to and consume, like the media. Like you said with TikTok. TikTok's purpose is not to enable you to have an enlightened life. TikTok's purpose is to keep you scrolling on the app. Like
yes,
you're the product. Your
you
attention
are
is
the
the
product.
product. So if
Yeah.
people don't understand that, they'll misuse the living crap out of the platform.
Yeah.
Which,
Yes.
again,
Yeah.
as a marketer, I think about this and I'm like, how can I, balance the good and the bad, right? So anyway, I digress. One thing that I need to share with you is, you spent some time on architecting, racing, on the water, right, with the yachts,
Yep.
and you, I believe, had some experience with the Navy.
Yes, as well. Yep.
Yes. So I had a grandfather who spent 27 years in the military between Air Force and Navy.
Oh wow.
And he
Okay.
always had planes and boats. Anytime we'd go somewhere as a kid growing up, he goes, "That's a great place for a fort. Oh, that boat could fit there." And he just loved aircrafts and loved ships. And one thing that always hung up in his office was this trivium for filtering your thoughts. Is it true? Is it useful? Is it kind? That
Mm,
applies to thinking to your own thoughts to yourself, not just the word you say to others. And I
100%.
think if people would just take that frame, true, useful, kind,
Mm,
like there would be a lot less of that feeling of imposter syndrome. Because I mean, if that's useful, then use it, right? Like I think in entrepreneurship, rule number one is use what you got. And if you have a feeling of insecurity, you have a feeling of inadequacy, then work your tail off until you don't, right? But people, I think, sometimes mistake being effective or productive with being ruthless, And it's like you can be kind and productive.
yes. Yeah. Well, I think, and that's a lot of what gets talked about in this book, People, as well, right? Is building this intentional culture because part of, I feel like, from 30 years ago, let's say, that the culture in businesses used to be a lot more of the sort of command and control, top down, do what I say, shut up and get on with it sort of culture. And I think there are still vestiges of that in certain places these days, but it's kind of going away because these days no one wants to really kind of work in that type of environment anymore. Right. And then, we also talk about chaotic culture, right? Where it's sort of like there isn't really a lot of intention about what's going on. And then we sort of talk about what's called a happy accident, which is kind of,
Right.
a bunch of people got together and it's kind of cool and everything's working. But it's kind of hard, one of the symptoms of that, everybody's having a lot of fun, but it's actually hard to add new people into that group because they're kind of formed into
It seems
a bit of
almost
a
like
clique.
by accident, well, obviously accident, but like random versus
Random, yes, not
predictable.
intentional.
I found that when I was reading that book and I looked back at a few organizations I've been a part of, there was a struggle between leaders that really worked hard for intentional culture, but it was bad culture. So it was command and control, I believe that book references.
Yeah,
How can people turn command and control into, healthy and thriving?
yeah. Well, um, there's a number of things that have to be done, and this is oftentimes where I sort of really see that it comes to starting off with the leader of that business, right? Needs to have a moment with themselves when they realize I'm holding on too tight. This is wearing me out. It's driving me into the ground, and I need to find a better way. And that better way is to create that intentional culture. That way is to develop a leadership team that's truly taking the business forward. And, we're seeing this large wave at the moment of, boomers who have started businesses. Now they're in their, 60s and 70s and they want to retire. They want to go sit on the beach and they want to be able to sell their business. But if they're still, the top producer, if they're still sitting in their office
Key man
conducting an
dependent.
entire orchestra, then you can't take that person out of the business and have the business have any value because it all falls apart. So part of going on an EOS journey is to build a leadership team, right? And so there's a lot of different components in EOS that we get from that command and control to the intentional culture. So, just really diving in on core values and who are we as a team, right? Really being able to kind of define like what that looks like and then help shape the business. I mean, this is not I don't have a magic wand. I can sort of wave over a business and have it transform overnight. This is a journey that we go on to move from one place to the next, right? The key thing is to figure out the straightest, most efficient path to getting there, and that's my job as a navigator. I love doing that. The trouble is, a lot of people kind of walk around and get stuck in circles, right? And repeating things that don't really kind of work. So let's get on the journey to getting to that intentional culture and to transform the business, create a leadership team, get other people invested, right, all throughout the business, caring about the future of the business. And that's what EOS gives us, all of the building blocks that enable that to happen.
It sounds similar to if you had to assemble a crew to race yachts. Like what you said about navigating, so you're not going around in circles. Obviously, like speed matters with racing, but directionally like the direction probably matters equal to or more than speed, right? And like a crew, you need people. One person, theoretically, maybe they can. I just don't believe they could. Can't effectively beat a well organized crew rowing in the same direction. Obviously, in yachts, you likely don't row, but you understand the analogy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's I love the integrated approach that you have with both nature and agriculture, and also with the real life business experience analogies with navigating ships with your yacht experience. It comes back like it's funny. I have to point this out because for everyone listening, and if you're an implementer, take a note. Steve is living a embodied whole life, right? How each thing that you're interested in, you work on, you're passionate about, supports the other, right? Because lessons learned from one thing transfer and apply to another thing. And like you just create a very wide frame of reference that, people say, this is my funniest objection for marketing, just quick aside. It's like, well, have you ever worked on a business exactly like mine? No, because no business is exactly like yours. However, I've worked on like 500 businesses, and there's a lot of commonalities, and I'm sure I could find one or two.
Yes. Well, and, the commonality, we get that question too, right? But, the commonality is any business that's got people in it, is a prime candidate for this EOS journey. But, to sort of answer, where you were going with this question, with this thought, EOS provides a set of tools. It's a framework. It's a collection of simple, proven tools that we can help get a team working together, harnessing the human energy of the business and harmonizing it. And yes, there's exact analogies with yacht crews that I worked with, because I worked with some really amazing crews. And I knew what it felt like, right? When we got the crew together and everybody sort of understood their roles and we'd done the training and the practice. And what it did is it freed up the energy of that crew to be able to literally kind of look up and out of the boat, right? And this is the key thing, right? Is getting a number of eyes like up and out of the boat, so we can look and see like what's the wind doing? What are those clouds doing over there? What's happening with the waves? Where's the competition going, right? And to bring all of that information back so that the leadership team can make their appropriate strategic and tactical decisions in the boat, right? And so when we've got everybody working together as a cohesive team, there's just lots more opportunity for success gets unlocked by that team working together versus, a team where, everybody's kind of got their head down there. That's your rope to pull, not mine. I'm not going to pull the sail up from down below. But then everybody's literally got their heads down, right? And they're not looking up, right? And so that team is missing, right? The strategic and tactical information coming back into the boat and is not going to do so well. So I just see all of those same things happening. And, we got a million analogies in this conversation today.
Love it.
The other one, is kind of like when you see a bunch of 6-year-olds playing soccer, right? Like they're all chasing the ball in a clump, right? There's like 8 kids, 10 kids, like all chasing the ball together. the point is, right, as we grow up, as we mature, then you learn to like stay in, play in your position, like stay in your positions and pass the ball. And then we can do so much better because we can pass the ball over the competition and go in and score the goal, right? And that's the whole, sometimes when I start working with teams, I hear, we're all wearing a lot of hats. Everybody's doing this, everybody's doing all the same stuff together. It's
It's
very
chaos.
inefficient. And and a lot of balls are getting dropped as well, right? Because I thought you had it, or I thought you had it, that sort of thing. Or it's unclear about what the decision making is. So one of the journeys that we're going on, right, to get to that intentional culture, that cohesive team, is to figure out the right structure, figure out all the positions, get everybody in their positions, and let's learn to pass the ball.
I notice you have in your library behind you some Ryan Holiday books. One looks like Courage is Calling. I don't know the other one. I'm sure I have similar books over your
the Daily Stoic, yeah.
Daily Stoic.
Yeah.
So as we've alluded to some of these principles, we've talked about them, and for those that are familiar with the Traction Library, Good to Great, a gentleman with the same last name, a distant relative of mine, a cousin of my grandfather, James Stockdale.
Oh, yeah.
The Stockdale
paradox.
Retain faith that you'll prevail in the end, regardless of the difficulties, while at the same time confronting the most brutal facts of your current realities.
Yes.
But
huge.
When we talk about Stoicism, and I want to inject that because it does, it's not to not feel emotion. It's how to manage. It's how to manage external events happening to one and what you can control. And the story that is just interesting is for those that are not either, have not read Good to Great or have not, too familiar with the story of James Stockdale, they probably are just familiar with his 1992 vice presidential speech, which was up there with one of the ones that was largely not applauded, right? They didn't think it was great. Who am I? What am I doing here? Asking broad philosophical questions in the presidential debate, as Donald Trump said, showed is not the winning strategy, right? The antithesis of that may be a higher effective strategy. But his story is such that he was the highest ranking military official in Vietnam who dropped the first bomb and spent 7.5 years in Hanoi Hotel, one of the most brutal prisoner of war camps, and then came back and got his PhD in philosophy and then ran for vice president. And it's like, I feel like people, if they knew the whole story of that, would understand that, like, you can endure a long time, because we're talking about 8-year-olds playing soccer. The entire genesis of that 8-year-old up to the point where they're chasing the ball, you can endure some pretty brutal realities and still, at the end of it, come back. And everyone thinks you're dead. And you can come back and make a mess on the vice presidential stage, which in my opinion is great. I look at mistakes as still opportunities to learning. Mm-hmm. So I felt compelled to share that story with you because obviously as someone a fan of Stoicism, but to me it puts a pin in the thought of, like, obstacles are about as important and painful as you allow them to be.
Yeah. Well, this is, what we were talking about before, like, having that mental framework, that inner stance of this is happening for me. Right. And just to touch upon one of the things you were mentioning, and I mean, I love, the Stockdale paradox. I love reading about his story and, oh my gosh, the things that he went through, in that prisoner of war camp, right? And really sort of seeing, the people that lost hope, and then once they lost hope that they were going to prevail, they were done for, right? And just, I think it's a great story. We talked about a lot in the EOS community during COVID in 2020, right? Just, never lose hope that you're going to prevail, but we cannot ignore the brutal reality of the facts in front of us right now. I think we're going through a similar phase at the moment, that businesses need to look and see about what's going on, the brutal reality of the facts in the economy, but never lose hope that they're going to prevail, right? We're going to come out of it. But the thing that I really love, I think, I've read a lot of Stoicism in my life. And one of the things that you alluded to was this thing about, well, there's this idea that Stoicism is about sort of like shoving your emotions down and not, feeling your feelings and things. And I sort of really see it, I know that's not true about Stoicism, but
A
it's a
common
hard
misconception.
thing. It's a misconception, but the hard thing I think, and I do this with individual coaching for myself and coaching that I do with clients around the mental game, is this idea of mastery and this concept that, that people don't want to feel certain feelings at a time because they are concerned that that feeling is going to, you know, take over and they're going to lose control, right? They're going to do something that they're going to, potentially regret later. And to me, this journey of what I call mastery around this is, mastery is to be able to feel your feelings, to have them come through you, and then to have them move on, right? And you can, um, to be in control from the aspect of, I'm not going to lose control, right? I'm going to feel the feelings, have them wash through me, and I don't have to, I can have thoughts that come into my mind all the time. The key thing is I don't have to take action on them, right? That's just a thought. It's just a thought, and we can let that thing go, right? And then we can choose a different thought. And mastery to me, and I've been on this journey myself for years, right? I mean, there's been plenty of things in my life that I've not wanted to feel that feeling, right? So I've
Sure.
shoved that thing down and let's just, put some duct tape and string over that and not
Right.
face it, right? But mastery is going through the sort of the healing practice, but also the practice of learning, doing the reps to be able to feel the feelings and not get taken over by them. But just realize that they're there and they're just, part of life.
I mean, isn't that what courage is, right?
Mm,
It's feeling fear, but saddling up anyway and doing that which must be done in
yeah.
face of fear. I feel like fear is the one thing that you feed it by avoiding it. I don't.
Yes. Yes. Well, I think that's avoiding going
It's
into,
like a parasite. If you
yeah.
if you ignore a parasite and just let it be, it'll keep withdrawing from the host it's ad infinitum.
Yes. Yeah. Well, so this is where, I think, I'm a big proponent of hiring coaches, right? And not just coaches for the leadership team, but I mean, that's what we do in EOS is help my clients as a group face the things that they don't want to face in their business, right? Not from a point of judging and pointing fingers and casting blame, but, one of the things that we really teach in EOS is it's an issue, just an issue. We put it on the issues list and then we work together as a really great team to solve that issue, right? And get it out of the way. As an individual, I've hired coaches for myself, for my own journey, and then I coach others to be able to go on that journey of facing the things that we've been avoiding and bringing them up and resolving them. And there's a whole bunch of different modalities and techniques and frameworks and things that, I always sort of feel like, there's a key, right, that will be able to unlock that thing and to have it no longer be that thing that we've shoved down inside and don't want to deal with. Sorry. Go
No,
ahead.
I was just gonna to add on. It's like IDS, a tool in EOS. Issues, you either deal with them and I realize it's not an issue and you move on, or you deal with it and you come to a solve and you say, all right, we're going to commit to the action. But what
Mm-hmm.
you don't do is let the issue still like eat you alive. And I think
Right.
that's sort of the line of thinking we're going down.
Yes. No, it's because those things, and I see them. I mean, oftentimes they come around, the difficult personnel decisions, right? People, we have somebody who's not working out in the business, but we're afraid to let them go, and I think, Jim Collins really had a great frame for this in Good to Great, which is looking at, somebody who's not fitting in a business probably is feeling unhappy in themselves anyway, whether or not they're admitting that or touching or avoiding that, whatever. But the idea really is that we should free them up. There is another team, there is another business where they can be in, their zone of unique ability, as I mentioned before. So we shouldn't always sort of see letting somebody go as being a bad thing, but maybe sometimes keeping them in the business is actually the disservice to them, right? It's sort of this difference between being nice and being kind, right? You can be nice all you want, but that's not always being kind to somebody.
Steve, that was so poetic the way you put that very common, universal problem, which goes back to a joke I made earlier. Well, have you ever worked a business just like mine? No, but I work with plenty of people in businesses. And then the way you describe that problem, I think 9 out of 10 owners, if they're being honest, would say they've had a very similar instance around people, right?
Yeah.
The fear of
Yeah,
letting
that's
someone
hard.
go. That both people know it's probably not the right fit.
Yeah, I know. I've been there. I mean, I've had to, let people go that I've hired in a business. That's not always, a great feeling, but I think you know, the reframe around it can be very helpful and useful to be able to help the business move forward and the individuals involved, right? We want to free people up to be living a life of more flow, more joy, more freedom, more peace, right? And if we're constricted, if we're bound up, that's not happening.
Well, everyone, we promised to have conversations about life, liberty, pursuit of property, but in specific, personal development and business growth. I would like to say I believe we delivered on that promise so far. I'm going to ask you, Steve, a few high level questions
Sure.
to really drive some points home. The first question I have is, if you could go back in time, not saying you're going to navigate the journey of your life differently, but just to share like a tidbit, right? Maybe it's just for your own satisfaction with your 8-year-old self. The self that may have been on the soccer field in New Zealand in a swarm chasing a ball with all the other 8-year-olds. What is one thing that, maybe at that point in your life you believed that may have been not so true, and now that you believe that would be helpful for that 8-year-old? Like, what advice would you give your former self?
I think the thing sort of looking back is, keep following your instincts, keep following the things that um, are your unique ability, right? That the things that kind of float your boat, so to speak. I think one of the things that I often give this perspective to people who are asking me this sort of, that question about advice to my younger self, and that's always maximize the choices that you have in front of you. And so, what I mean by that is sometimes, people decide or do something that kind of maybe cuts off or limits a path or a set of things that might be available to them in the future by, making a decision. And so, I always sort of feel like, well, what if you can choose, you know, maybe going to college or going to vocational, going and doing an associate's degree or something like that. I mean, just sort of which of those two decisions is going to maximize your future choices that you have in life? And it may be, you know, going and doing a 4-year college degree and getting, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. What's that decision going to play out like versus going to, say, a 2-year trade school, learning how to do something with your hands, that sort of thing, coming out with far less debt and more skills, and how does that maximize your choices? So always this perspective of how do you maximize the choices that you will still have in front of you? Don't close those things off too early.
Poetically said. I think the longer term horizon that you can keep that decision branch, the more options you have in long term, typically a good filter for a better decision.
Yeah.
If you make a decision that could end up with, a linear path, there's only one option. One of the definitions I love of freedom is the ability to do otherwise, or its absence of external coercion.
Mm.
Commonly accepted in Western thought. But you're basically saying, hey, pursue liberty in your decision making, and it's likely going to have a compound effect of positive.
Yeah. Yeah. Keep pursuing that.
All right. I hinted before the show, Steve, and it's time for my favorite section of the series, which is leave a question, ask a question.
Okay.
I'm going to switch it up. Before I ask you the question from the last guest, because this one is like, I don't believe in coincidence. And this is just another reason why I don't believe in coincidence. But what question do you have for the next guest without knowing who they are? And I promise I won't tell you. If you had one question.
Question for the next guest. Who would you have to be to create your life of play, fun, light, and peace? There's my question. Who would you have to be to create your life of play, fun, light, and peace?
Figure out who you. It's going back to the Shakespeare quote we mentioned earlier. Know your role and play it well.
Yeah.
All right. This is the question that the last guest, and I swear did not know I was interviewing you. What do you have to let go of right now in order to blossom into doing what you absolutely love doing and are great at? What are 1 to 3 things? I love the word blossom because you have a 31-acre farm.
Exactly.
You think about this question daily, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, yes, gosh, what a great question. So I'm going through a process myself of delegating and elevating. So I've worked with a lady I hired as my executive assistant, but at the beginning of last quarter, we elevated her into the role of being my practice manager, which then, allows me to delegate and to let go of a lot of things in my business. And the big thing was really kind of letting go of control of my calendar and also, my inbox. I'm not completely out of my inbox, but, the idea of, hey, here's a bunch of rules about, boundaries and things and swim lanes about how to set up meetings. Here's all the meetings that I need to be having, or you even keep an eye out for the meetings that I need to be having, and having somebody organize that. So I've let go of that, and that is something that I'm not alone in having resistance to those sorts of things. Letting somebody else into your inbox and things is a watershed moment, I think, in a lot of entrepreneurs' lives, is this whole sort of part of letting go and really kind of surrender. For me, I've been on this coaching journey myself of surrendering to what's going on in life. But from the surrender and acceptance comes freedom to create. That's for me, and I see this at all levels in organizations and with my clients, but the ability to be able to create from a place of freedom, not from a place of trying to create from constriction. It's a grind, right? We have to grind it out. Well, what
Tense.
about if we create from a place of freedom?
Be like water. Be like
Be
water.
like water. Yeah. Yeah. Be like the rain.
Well, Steve, it's been an absolute pleasure sharing stories and thoughts with you, getting to know you better and sharing with anyone listening. If you take a few of these tidbits, what I want you to do is to pursue liberty. Take the decisions and the actions that would further increase the likelihood of being who you are. And as Steve asked, be who you would have to be in order to have a life full of play and light and fun and peace. That's my ask. I don't run ads on the show, but if you found this show to be enlightening at all, please share it with a friend. It's the only way it grows. Steve, thank you.
Thank you,
So
Ross.
much.
That's been awesome. Awesome conversation.
Everyone else, be well.